Hey, what up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Ari Temkin, right here of the Orange Bloods Texas Football YouTube channel. You can also catch me talking college football on SiriusXM's Big 12 radio, as well as SiriusXM's ESPNU radio. And today, we're going to be talking around the Big 12. Take a look at some of the other teams that played this past week. Now, there were only 3 games in the Big 12 this past Saturday. And so we're going to be focusing on those specific teams. With one exception, we will talk about Oklahoma State. Of course, Texas's opponent on Saturday, who was idle last week. Huge break for the Cowboys, tough break for the Texas Longhorns. But before we get to all of that, if you have not yet already, I would urge you to go ahead and hit subscribe and ring the bell. That way you're always notified when we post new videos. Plus, if you like what you're watching, give it a thumbs up. It'll help other people find the video as well. All right, let's start today with one of the idle teams of the Big 12 because there are only 3 games, which meant that 4 teams in the Big 12 were off, including the Oklahoma State Cowboys. What a tough break for Texas. They played a shootout, a emotionally draining game in the Red River Showdown at the Cotton Bowl against Oklahoma, the best team in the conference, while Oklahoma State, who's undefeated, didn't play, had the week off. Tough break. They obviously come to DKR, which is nice for the Longhorns. At least they don't have to travel for this week's game. But the focus here on Oklahoma State is amazingly on a team that is really good defensively and at this point in time is really good running the football. So this is not your father's Oklahoma State football team, or even, I guess, your brother's Oklahoma State football team. This is not what we're used to seeing from Oklahoma State football. A team that has been really good passing the football with great elite level receivers. Right now, this is a one-dimensional offense with a turnover issue at quarterback, Spencer Sanders, we'll get to that in a moment, with an elite level defense. And so at this point, it's strength on strength. Texas's really good offense against Oklahoma State's really good defense. Now, if you're looking at this and watching this and thinking, Oklahoma State, who have they played this year that indicates how good their defense is? Well, one, really nice road win against Boise State with basically none of their complementary receivers. In fact, they were down to a walk-on wide receiver who is the grandson of Billy Tubbs, who made a play to win a game for them, but he's a walk-on. That's who they were down to at receiver in that game against Boise State. So Boise State, Baylor, obviously not a great Baylor offense. We'll get to that in a second here. But still, even going back to last season, this was an elite level defense. Oklahoma State won a bunch of games last year because of the strength of their defense, and they returned virtually that entire defense. Now, Trey Sterling is out for the year, but they have done a good job in replacing Trey Sterling. One thing's for sure, Jim Knowles' defense has been really, really good, and it hasn't just been in the 5 games this season they played so far. They've been really, really good for the past year and a half now. So it's certainly, a defense you don't want to take lightly. In modern football, we are seeing elite level offenses be able to beat elite level defenses. And I certainly think when I look to make a pick on who I think will win this game, which will come later in the week, that's one of the parts to me that I'll look at is really good offense, able to get in front and beat a really good defense. However, Oklahoma State is good up front and they can manufacture pressure. And it's why they are top 10 in the country in opponents' rush yards per play at 2.8. So, obviously Texas is going to try to get their ground game going with Bijan Robinson, and Oklahoma State is going to try to stop that from happening. It's going to come down to Casey Thompson, the pass offense, being able to make plays against this good secondary, really good safety core of the Oklahoma State Cowboys. The other side to this, will Oklahoma State be able to put up some points on Texas's offense? Oklahoma State, Spencer Sanders, really highly recruited quarterback who at this point has not lived up to his potential. A lot of high risk, high reward with Spencer Rattler. He does have a lot of brain farts, makes mistakes, turn the football over. In their final game before the bye, in a win against Baylor, Oklahoma State and Spencer Sanders made some maddening throws. He had 3 picks in that game, 2 of which were his fault. The third was on the receiver who should have caught the football, but he pops it up in the air and it's intercepted for the 3rd time in this game. Just to give you an idea here, Baylor had 3 interceptions. Baylor cumulatively, why not? -7 yards offensively after those 3 turnovers. -7. That is a testament to both what Baylor couldn't do on offense, and again, we'll get to that in a second, and what Oklahoma State's defense was able to do. -7 yards total after 3 interceptions by Spencer Sanders. So he had those 3 picks, 2 of which were his fault, but then he made a ridiculous 32-yard touchdown pass that's like, you see flashes of brilliance like that, while simultaneously you see just maddening interceptions and careless plays and mistakes. And so that's what Texas has to hope for in this football game. That once again, Spencer Sanders is going to turn the football over. Now, Tay Martin's a guy, is a Washington State transfer that's been really, really good. In fact, in the games in which he's been available to play the full game, he's over 100 yards in each of those games. So, but the problem is he's been hurt and out of the lineup throughout the season this year. So he will be back and playing in this game, and it looks like with Oklahoma State getting that extra week of rest, they were able to get some of their other receivers back and healthy. So again, many of the games that they struggled to pass the football in, they struggled because they've been really injured at receiver, also because Spencer Sanders has been high risk, high reward. But here's where I'm really in trouble if I'm a Texas Longhorn fan. Oklahoma State can really run the football. If you haven't heard about Jaylen Warren, he's one of the best running backs in the Big 12 that you haven't heard of. Because this guy is electric and has been one of the top rushers in this conference, a conference of top rushers, like Deuce Vaughn, Bijan Robinson, and Breece Hall. Jaylen Warren's been right there with all of them. And when you couple that with where Spencer Sanders has been effective, and that is in running the football, that is a really, really difficult zone read type offense to account for. And if I'm Oklahoma State, I am going to run the ball down your throat until you prove you can stop me. Because I'm watching film, Texas, Oklahoma, and seeing I don't think you can stop the run. So, Pete Kwiatkowski, one of the big emphases he's got to put on practice this week is figuring out how to fill running fits, which obviously is something coaches are always going to say when you can't stop the run. More importantly, figuring out ways to tackle, get guys to the ground, because this has been an issue now for Texas for quite some time. Okay, so enough of Oklahoma State, Texas. We'll have plenty more to preview throughout the week here on the Orange Bloods Texas Football YouTube channel. Let's take a look at where we think Texas is in terms of this Big 12 hierarchy based on what we saw this past week. I'm going to start with Baylor, because Baylor is a really good football team. They're good defensively. They've got elite level, I'm talking about Sunday players on all 3 levels of their defense. They've got Jalen Petrie, who is one of the best defensive players in the Big 12. And this is a surefire Sunday player because he's a hybrid safety linebacker. Really good player. Then, of course, they've got Terrell Bernard at the linebacking core. And then Apu Ika, who is a transfer from LSU, who came to Baylor from LSU because he had been with Dave Aranda previously, and he is the engine of that defense as a nose tackle. So really, really good defensively. Obviously, that's Dave Aranda's bread and butter. The problem has been, and let's go back to the Oklahoma State game for a second, -7 yards after 3 interceptions by Spencer Sanders. The problem was Baylor really didn't give Gary Bohannon, their quarterback, many opportunities to throw the football. Now, you could say that's because Gary Bohannon is not really good throwing the football. I'm not sure of that. And we saw that this past week in Baylor's win. This is when they got plenty of opportunities one-on-one early on in the game because Neil Brown and West Virginia also didn't believe that they trusted Gary Bohannon to throw the football, and Gary Bohannon delivered. You know, it's funny. Texas scored on a 75-yard touchdown pass, screen pass, but 75 yards to the house with Xavier Worthy on the first play. Baylor got a 75-yard touchdown pass down the field from Gary Bohannon to Tyquan Thornton on the second play from scrimmage in that football game. And so what Baylor did is they saw West Virginia was probably going to bail out to stop the run, and they took their shots down the field. They had a lot of one-on-one matchups early on in this football game, and by the time West Virginia had switched to a zone defense, it hadn't mattered because even in zone, West Virginia still couldn't cover anybody in their secondary. But the point here is not to bring up how bad West Virginia is, especially defensively. They looked like a mess and kind of lost. The point here is to bring up the fact that West Virginia challenged Gary Bohannon to make plays with his arm, and he came through. And if Baylor can continue to get plays on offense like that to supplement their dynamic running game of Treston Ebner and Abram Smith, Baylor's a candidate here for a Big 12 championship game berth. That's no joke. They have a good defense, good running game. The only problem was they've been far too conservative in not allowing Gary Bohannon to help them win games. And if they unleash the Bohannon, then they have a much higher ceiling offensively. We'll see, though, because it's still a big question mark. And if I'm ranking pass offenses in the Big 12, they're further down the list, obviously, than where I'd have Texas, which would be at the top of that list. Okay, so the 3 games this weekend of the Big 12, Red River Showdown, Baylor, West Virginia, and TCU, Texas Tech. Don't have to waste time talking about TCU, Texas Tech, because Texas has already beaten those 2 teams. And West Virginia, I mean, this was a team with high expectations going into this year that's started off 0-3 in conference play. Now, they've hit the bye this week, but it's not been a good start to the season for Neil Brown. Certainly expectations much higher than what they've done. But if we're trying to survey sort of the situation throughout the rest of the top 5 of the Big 12, I'd say at this point in time, it's pretty obvious who the top 5 are. Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, Iowa State, and Baylor. So we know about Oklahoma. We've talked about Oklahoma State. We know about Texas. We just talked about Baylor. How about Iowa State? Now, the Cyclones are kind of under the radar right now because they're 3-2. But they've lost to Iowa, who hasn't lost this year and is 3rd in the country currently, and then to Baylor to start Big 12 play. Iowa State was off last week, and this week they have Farmageddon, Iowa State, Kansas State. And Iowa State looking to win in Manhattan for the first time since 2004. They've lost 9 consecutive games in Manhattan, Kansas. Kansas State, on the other hand, has lost 7 consecutive Big 12 games dating back to last season. Hard to believe. Now, here's the deal. Iowa State, the common theme we've heard amongst the Big 12 teams we're talking about today, really good defensively. Now, much higher upside offensively because they've got Breece Hall, who, right there with Bijan Robinson in terms of the best running backs of the Big 12, led the nation in rushing last year, did Breece Hall. And then they've got a ridiculous target over the middle in Charlie Kolar, who's an NFL tight end, who's been dealing with some health issues, but seems to be getting back to full health. Brock Purdy, who's a major question mark, but I would submit to you that Purdy isn't as bad as the receivers on the outside. That's been one of the big issues for Iowa State for the last couple of years, is they've got good targets over the middle, good running game, but they just don't have great guys to separate on the outside. They don't have great skill position players on the outside. And so, look, I think this is a team that was top 10 in the country to start the year. I don't think they're suddenly not that team. The Baylor loss is a tough loss, and we'll see how this plays out. If Iowa State obviously loses to Kansas State, then forget about it, kiss them goodbye. But I see that this is a team that could be hanging on here in Big 12 play. Just a team to watch for as their offense evolves. Oh, and by the way, it is Brocktober, and in that, Iowa State has gone 12-2 in the month of October since 2017. In Matt Campbell's first year, 2016, Iowa State went 0-4 in October. Since then, 12-2. Happy Brocktober, everybody. All right, thanks for checking out today's video as we go around the Big 12. Plenty more to come on the channel throughout the week as we're previewing and getting you ready for Oklahoma State. So make sure to subscribe if you have not yet already and ring the bell. That way you're always notified when new videos are posted, and they're constantly getting posted. Plus, if you like what you saw, and if you're still watching, you probably liked what you saw, give it a thumbs up. That will help other people find the video as well. But for now, I'm out. Peace.